Good evening, everybody. Welcome and thanks for joining us today. My name is Orlando Burgoyne. I'm the Provincial Lead for the Special Needs and Inclusion Program based out of the Trenton MFRC. Today, I have my colleague, Andy Lynn James, who is the coordinator for the Trenton Military Family Resource Center for Special Needs Families. And we have our lovely guest speaker, Mary Ellen Thompson, who's going to be talking to us today about social skills development and important predictors for success in life. So Mary Ellen Thompson is a speech and language pathologist. Today, she will be sharing her expertise on the subject. As we go through this presentation, if you have any questions regarding any of the content, please feel free to post those in the Q&A or in the comment section online. We will be sure to answer those questions at the end of the presentation. So thank you, Mary Ellen, for joining us again this evening. Take it away.
Okay, thank you. So good evening, everybody. And this topic is actually near and dear to my heart because I feel like it's one of those things that we don't like to talk about and we don't realize how important it is. But really, if we look at the data out there, it tells us that your success in being able to make social connections is in fact more important than your academic success in finding a job and maintaining a career. So if we think about the long-term consequences of not helping our children develop these skills, it's pretty significant. So I'm just going to show you a few photos, and I just want you to think about these photos and think about what emotion you see. And I think you'll be able to read these situations and tell us exactly what is happening with no words. And that's important because often social skills rely a lot on nonverbal communication, which is really important. So here we go. Here's the first one. So I think you know what's going on here. We're talking about a sandwich, and you can imagine what these guys are saying about the sandwich and comparing lunches. And you can decide if you think this is happy or sad or somewhere in between. So this next picture is one of these things that will bring up a lot of emotions for a lot of people. And we all know that bullying has been on the radar now. And in my mind, this picture just tells a whole story about what's going on with these little girls. And you can all imagine, and there's a mix of emotions. There's three children probably on one side, and there's another child probably not feeling so great about herself. And then this is emotion in sport, and we've all seen this happen. We've all seen this happen in multiple sports, and we all know that this kind of sets an example for our children, and maybe it's kind of what not to do, or when is this behavior appropriate and when is it inappropriate. And so it's really hard for young kids who see these things to really say, well, okay, you can do that on the baseball field, or you can do that in a professional hockey game, but if you do that at school, then the consequences are very different. So it's all about learning to read the situation. So what are the benefits of good social skills? And there's been a lot of research that's looked into why are these important and what do they give us? So if you have these great social skills, your opportunity to have a career and get a great education are greatly enhanced. So people with good social skills are more likely to attend college, are more likely to find a full-time job by the age of 25. And these studies have been replicated a few times by pretty reputable institutions, and they just show the importance of this. And people who have these great social skills tend to be more successful in life. And we're talking about those skills at the kindergarten level. So if you are able to make friends and regulate your emotions and participate in the kindergarten program successfully, that's a good predictor of how successful you will be in adulthood. which if you think about it, that lays a lot of burden of responsibility on parents and care providers of young children and educators, because suddenly this becomes so important. And it's hard to sort of find the benchmarks for these things. We also know that strong friendships in childhood are best predictors of mental health. And many people have said we have a mental health crisis in this era. So fostering those friendships and how you foster those friendships is pretty critical. And I just wanted to look at this. This is the wheel that talks about predictors of mental health. They talk about it as the positive mental health toolkit. But you see up here, these social skills are really important. And there's some other things in this little circle that also sort of support the idea of social skills, like being kind to yourself and others and finding positive coping strategies. And all of those things relate to good social skills and are really critical for that strong mental health component, which we know predicts success later in life. So what happens if you don't have great social skills? Well, generally the research shows that these are the people that have more dependence on social assistance. They spend much more time in legal difficulties and talking to prison officials or dealing with the law. They also tend to have substance abuse problems, and they have issues in their relationships. So there's lots of negative consequences. And then people say, well, when do these skills develop and how do they develop? So we know that cortisol is this thing in our brain, and if it's too high, it can have negative consequences. And lots of stress makes it too high. We also know that if it's too low, like we don't care about anything, then that's also a negative indicator. But what I really want to look at here on this chart is this is the sensitivity to cortisol. And you can see, look at this blue line, peer and social skills. And, you know, we have all these things that develop early in life, like hearing and vision and emotional control. But this peers and social skills continues to develop. So here we are at 4.5. And if we were able to pull this graph right out till the end of puberty and into the teen years, we would still see that this peer social skills would still be developing, would still be sensitive to the stress levels in our lives. So when we talk about encouraging less stress and helping children learn to cope, this is why, because we want them to have a very positive outcome. And we know that when they go to school, they add stressors. We know when you hit puberty, there's added stressors. We know when you hit that magic age of driving, there's added stressors. We know that when you hit 19, there's added stressors. And we know that brain development continues up until 25, and in males even longer. So this is an important factor for, you know, 25% of these children's lives, which by the time it ends, they're really not children, they're young adults. So this looks like we're pushing a lot of burden on parents and educators. And so everybody probably says, oh no, what do I do now? What am I supposed to teach? This is all of a sudden a huge burden of responsibility. So let's see what we should teach in terms of social skills. So this chart talks about the 7 most important social skills for kids to learn. And the data really shows that these skills give you the most bang for your buck, so to speak, so that children who have these skills do better in life, and adults who have these skills do better socially, do better in their jobs, and do better in job performance. So they include things like sharing, cooperating, listening, following directions, respecting personal space, being able to make eye contact, and using manners. So we're going to go through each of these, talk about what they are, and talk about how we foster them and how we develop them in kids at different age levels. So the first is sharing. And we all know that under 2, there's not much desire to share. And usually by 2, they start to understand that sharing could be a possibility, but not really something that they always want to do. That ability to share resources starts to build between 3 and 6, but it tends to be, I'll share this with you when I'm finished with it, which is not truly the definition of sharing. And then by 7 and 8, children become concerned with fairness and concerned with sharing. They're willing to share, but if they see things as being unfair, they become very emotionally upset by that. So sharing is a difficult topic in terms of learning how to share, and then it has so many dimensions depending on our age. So how do we teach kids to share? Well, I know we'd all like to say you have to share this, but unfortunately forcing children to share does not really seem to help at all. It seems more important to set a good example, to show them how you're sharing, to tell them the advantages of sharing. If you share, then someone shares with you. It's really important to give them really positive feedback for sharing, like, this is wonderful, you shared, I'm so proud of you, etc. When they get upset about sharing, sometimes there's a tendency to strike out. So that's at the point where we have to say, use your words. So I'm upset because so-and-so is not sharing, as opposed to I'm just going to hit them, right? And I'm saying encourage self-advocacy because there's many times that even we as adults, you're very upset about something, but you don't say that. And so we want them to share that, because we know that when you share that information, it will reduce your stress hormones, and that's better for your development, and things will work out. We also want to encourage self-regulation. So which behaviors are okay when you're upset? And often we just get angry when they display inappropriate behaviors, but we have to tell them, like, what behaviors are okay. This is what you can do and you should do. And these are the things that people will frown on if you do it. You want to encourage turn taking. You can do that by playing games with your children where you always have a turn and then they have a turn. It's easy as parents to give in to it's always their turn, but that's not teaching them turn taking. So because in the real world, and when they start playing with their friends on the playground, turn taking is critical to developing communication. And communication is basically turn taking. I say something, then you say something. And so if they don't know about turn taking, and I'm sure as adults, we all know people who don't take turns in conversation, where it's always their turn and you just listen and get frustrated, but never get to get a word in edgewise, right? So I'm sure in some ways that's what a presentation is like, but that's okay in the presentation world. But in the world of communication, you want to have equal turns. The other thing about sharing is you have to teach children to wait. And wait is a really important, critical concept. It's a critical word to teach because not everything is immediate gratification. We have to wait our turn. We have to wait for the cookies to bake. We have to wait for the things in the garden to ripen. We have to wait for grandma to show up. So there's all kinds of things in the world where you can actually teach that concept of wait. We are waiting. And good things come when you wait, apparently. That's the idea that you need to send to them. So the second thing that we need to teach our kids is cooperation. And that's kind of working towards a common goal. And you really can't start doing this until kids are about 3.5. So you want to have projects where they can work together, because this teaches them respect. It teaches them community participation. It teaches them about helping others. You can even just use it as part of your family, like you are helping the family. If you sweep the floor, you are helping the family. So how do we teach cooperation? So there's all kinds of activities. You can teach cooperation through building activities, like those kids were building some block pyramid. You can also teach it through cooking, where certain people are responsible for certain ingredients and pouring those ingredients in. You can have cooperative games where the challenge is to solve the problem together. All kinds of chores at home can build cooperation. You can set the table cooperatively with giving each person a job. Many people talk about team sports as building cooperation, and I agree that they do, but we have to look carefully at the times where we implement team sports and what we do. So let's talk about team sports. So kids between 2 and 4, it's really unstructured play, and basically the focus is on movement. So even if kids are signed up for dance or gymnastics or any of these wonderful activities that are offered throughout the community, the basic goal usually is movement. And then between 4 and 5, we start to teach skills like throwing, catching, kicking, etc. And by the time kids are 6 to 7, they can focus on recreational leagues, but equal playing time is critical. And remember, these 6 and 7-year-olds are the ones that are saying life isn't fair. So when they see that they don't get equal playing time, that's when they get upset about sharing, and life isn't fair, and they become very upset about fairness. And often children, this is the one age where they might get turned off team sports, even though team sports have amazing things to offer children. So by 8, kids are often ready for competitive sports, but really in terms of their skill levels, we know that kids have to be sort of at least 10 to have those vision and balance and coordination skills that they need to understand and play sports. And in terms of like planning the play and understanding like what a double play is in baseball and how to pass the puck, etc., those things require some abstract reasoning. So that usually doesn't develop until kids are like between 10 and 12. So it's unrealistic to expect them to remember plays, etc., until they, have mastered those skills. So team sports are really important. They really help with cooperation and sharing, but we have to be careful not to introduce things before children are really ready developmentally for them. So the next thing we need to think about is listening. So good listening results in good social skills, because if you are going to be a good communicator, you need to listen what's being said to you. You need to be able to sort out the figure from the ground. So by that, we mean that if there's a lot of noise coming in, you've got to figure out what the important noise is. So in the classroom setting, if there's a lot of noise, the important noise is your teacher's voice. Or on the playing field, if you're playing and people are cheering and mom and dad are screaming and yelling and encouraging you, but the most important voice is probably either your coach's voice or your teammate that's telling you to pass it. So you have to figure out what's the critical voice in this situation. We know that listening is critical for healthy communication. How many times have people got angry with each other because one person didn't listen or didn't hear what the other person was saying? And in terms of listening, we also have to learn not to be distracted, because if you're distracted, you miss half the message. And so that can be a problem, especially for children with sort of like attention deficit type disorders, because they can get distracted easily, miss the message, then they assume that they're doing what is required, but they might not be, and they can't really self-monitor. So they rely on you to help them with that. So there's a lot of basic cognitive skills that you need for good listening. So you need attention. You need working memory. That's that little box in your brain that lets you keep 5 items in the box and helps you just think about those items and make a decision. If you can't remember those items, then it's really hard to make a decision. You need good receptive language. You need to understand vocabulary. You need to understand how grammar changes. You need to understand tense, because if it's future tense versus past tense, the message is very different. You need to be able to pick up on nonverbal cues, like those things that will tell you someone's upset with you, someone's not listening, someone's bored. It helps if you can visualize a task. Like if someone's giving you 3 directions, if you think in your brain, oh, I've got to go upstairs and I've got to get the red socks and I've got to bring my track pants downstairs, then if you make a picture in your mind, you're better able to do it. And metacognition is just being able to tell if you are listening, and if you're not, did you get the message? And if you're not, to ask the question and say, wait, I'm lost right now. I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do. And following directions is really good listening times 2, right? And it's so easy to get really upset when children don't follow directions. But maybe the question should be, why did they not follow the directions? What happened? So if they're getting into trouble for misbehavior, or they're failing at team sports because they're not listening to the instructions, or they can't follow the drill or whatever, we need to help them develop a strategy to follow those directions. So some strategies: really young children, they usually only can have one direction at a time. So you'll make your life less hectic and less frazzled, and their lives less frazzled, if you just send them on a mission to get one thing at a time. And it's really nice to say, would you please go and get, etc. But when you say things like, would you please do this, or could you do that, for young children, if they're distracted or they don't want to, they can say no. So the better way to say, if you really want to teach them to follow directions, is please go upstairs and get your socks. And there's no option to say no or no thank you kind of thing. And when you're giving those directions, it's important to get rid of all the distractions, because we know that the distractions will just end up with the child not understanding their directions. You can ask them, okay, so now tell me what you're going to go and do. So getting them to repeat back so you know, and then really reinforce that positive behavior. Maybe they just got 1 pair of socks, but remember, they got the 1 pair of socks. And, you know, you can use sort of if and then if there's non-compliance, and you can say, if this happens, then this happens, because teaching those if then statements can be really important for life in general. The next thing that we need to make sure that they understand is personal space. And we all know that feeling when someone is talking to you within 2 feet and you just feel like they're like yelling and they're in your space and they're too close. But sometimes we don't tell kids about that. So we want them to know that you have to kind of respect your other's personal space. We also have to teach them to respect others' belongings. If it's not yours, maybe you can use it, but you have to ask permission. And you can even do that in the home environment where you need to ask your brother, your sister, your mom, your dad permission to use those things. And where this can get really tricky is I told you a secret and then you shared the secret. So really talking to your kids about if something's a secret, that person really likes you and really respected you, they shared that information. So you can't share it with anybody else without asking them first. So personal space can lead to lots of problems. So how do we teach personal space? I love this little diagram, and I've done it many ways, and I've had young children draw circles on the floor and put themselves in the middle and put their family in the next circle and their friends and etc. So this circle is just to help kids understand who you share information with and who's in your personal space and who's outside. You have to teach them, you know, when you talk to other people, stand at arm's length. You have to teach them how to stand in a line. And I think we've all learned a lot about standing in lines with COVID. So they are probably good at that right now. Learning about keeping your hands to yourself, because that can result in all kinds of problems on the playground at school. And you can do all of these things just through role play. Let's practice. Let's do this. I'm going to be the teacher, you be, or I'm going to be your friend. Let's see, how would we talk about that? And the last thing is talk about what information you would share. And in the handouts for this presentation, there's quite a bit of information about who you share information with. And this is somewhat a family decision, but here are some guidelines. So within your family circle, you know, you can share that critical body and health information. You can share personal business and fears and worries, your religion, politics, you know, inside stories about jokes and humor and money and what bothers you. Like those are supposedly all safe topics within your family circle. And then within your friends circle, you know, you want to focus more on hobbies and sports and what you watch on TV and jokes. And I have school appropriate here, and there's a whole handout on what's appropriate to say at school and what's not appropriate to say at school, because some kids don't make the distinction of, oh, I can say this at home, but if I say this at school, I'm going to get in a lot of trouble. And, you know, friends can share favorite things like books and music and what they like and what they dislike, if they're happy or sad. So that's kind of your friends circle. What do you share with your teacher? Sometimes it's scary, the things that children share with their teachers. And so other children will refuse to share anything with their teachers. So the teacher will ask them to write a journal story, and they're like, I'm not going to tell the teacher about my life at home. Or they tell all kinds of tales from home that maybe are stretched a bit. So with the teacher, it's important to say, well, these are the things that we can talk about. And you can talk about how to solve problems at school, what your goals are in learning, your interests, your disinterests, what you're going to do on holidays. And you can decide how much you want to share, what you're going to do at recess, and you can share what you want to be when you grow up. So we're now expanding that. Acquaintances. So these are people that we know, but we don't know well. right? So with those people, it's mainly your hobbies, your experiences. You might belong to a chess club, but the only thing you share with those people is chess. Or you might share information about YouTube videos that you like about chess. So often with an acquaintance, the information you share is based on however you're acquainted with them in terms of their interests. And then there's a stranger circle, and this is difficult, and there's lots of resources out there. And, you know, we don't want our kids to be afraid. And we want, like, if someone says hello to them, we want them to know you can say hello back, but there's a boundary to how far the conversation goes. So you have to help them establish the boundary. Where does the conversation stop? And that's really important. And in the handout, there's a handout on sharing information. And then there's also a sharing information topic where it talks about what topics are appropriate for what age level. And this is probably for older kids, but it can be important because in my experience, we see lots of kids getting into all kinds of interesting problems because of what they share. So the next thing that's important is making eye contact. And this can be really, really difficult for a shy child who looks at the floor. And so I think what you have to do is just encourage them to let everyone see their beautiful eyes. And that's sort of what I tell them at a young age. Often children who have autism spectrum disorder will avoid eye contact. So it can be difficult in some situations. You can help them understand this by role playing. Like if you're role playing with them and you never look at them, they might get upset. And you want to show them, well, this is what it feels like when I'm looking at you, when I'm talking to you. And this is what it looks like when I'm not looking at you, when I'm talking to you. And the sincerity of the message certainly changes whether you have eye contact or not. Using manners, I think, is straightforward, but it's amazing how saying please, thank you, I'm sorry, excuse me, will gain respect from others. And others want to communicate with people that they think that they could like. And so that's the perception that you want to provide. So there's lots of strategies to teach manners. I think the most important thing is to be a good role model and to teach it explicitly. Don't be afraid to say, after someone gives you something, you say thank you. And then make sure that you praise them. If you hear them using manners independently, like that's amazing for young kids. So I think we all tend to do this, and I think it's pretty standard, but I just want to reinforce that it is important and you're all doing the right thing by doing that. So those are kind of the things that support social skill development. And so now I just want to talk about some things that are really difficult to talk about. And we put some resources in for this. So sometimes conversations can be difficult. And I know that this is difficult not only for kids, but also for adults. And some of us struggle with this. So death of a grandparent, your friend says, my grandma died. Then how do they respond? And what resources have you as a parent given them to help them with that? Or the friend says, my puppy died yesterday. What resources have you given them? So we put a handout in the handouts that talks about what to say and what not to say. You know, and I think it said most of the things of what to say are sort of empathetic things. I feel sad for you, all of those things. What not to say is, well, at least they lived a long life, or at least they're not in pain anymore. those kind of comments, we know from the research, don't necessarily help people. Now, some people may find that helpful, but in general, that's kind of the recommendations. In terms of pets, you know, it's always important to sort of have some words that you can say, just I'm sorry. And even if you just teach your kids to say I'm sorry in these situations, that's important. You know, you don't want to go start out this conversation about, well, are you going to get another pet, or what kind of pet are you going to get, and all of these things. And you don't want to push for details, because sometimes it's really hard for people to talk about those details, but they may share eventually. So this is one place where I think conversations are difficult, and we want to encourage you to support kids, because I think in my own upbringing, and I think many of us, no one ever talked about what do you say. And so we get in that line at a funeral home and think, oh no, what am I gonna say? You can Google all kinds of books that will help kids understand death. These are books that are for death of a grandparent. I just think that each family is different. Every person deals with death differently. So I don't want to say this is the best book. I just want you to know that there are resources out there that you can go on the internet now and you can Google things. You can actually see, there's lots of YouTube videos of people reading these books, and you can see which book really is the best for your family and your family situation, and you are the best judge of that, so trust yourself. And the same thing applies to losing a pet. There's lots of resources out there, and it depends on your own family situation which one is going to be the best. So other difficult situations can be things like going to the doctor. And I mean, I think you want to focus on the healthy checkup as opposed to the needles and all the other things that might happen. But it's important to sort of give children the background of what's going to happen at the doctor's office. One way to do that is through some of these books that talk about healthy checkups. Excuse me, that may talk about what happens if you break an arm, etc. Similarly, there's lots of books about visiting the dentist. And I think some of these books are great because they add humor. They talk about the tooth fairy. They talk about how it feels when your tooth falls out, because sometimes it's not really that pleasant and it might actually hurt a little bit. So you want kids to not be afraid and to understand that that's a normal part of life. And so this idea is how to talk to them about that. I think that this slide represents practicing scripts in play. So you will see in your handout some scripts about how you order food, how you order food at a drive-through, how you order food at a restaurant, how you order food in a fast food restaurant. And really, it wasn't that I didn't think you knew how to order food. I just wanted you to think about and reflect on when you're playing house or restaurant or whatever, because you know children love that pretend play. Make that pretend play meaningful. Make it pretend play where you're suddenly communicating with someone, like the person in the drive-through window. Oh, there's the waiter in the restaurant. How do you address them? How do you order your food? And children just really, really love these kinds of activities. Like, I think they thrive on having you play these things with them and being able to order food in this kind of scenario. And it's really good. And if they get great at it, don't be afraid to let them order their own food, because what better experience for them to use their skills and get rewarded. And, hopefully you'll have to read the situation about whether the person you're ordering from is willing to listen, but really that's what you want. And maybe off peak hours is the best time for them to order something, but it's a really good experience because that's where they're going to be going in life, and you're not always going to be there to order food for them. The last thing I want to talk about is social stories. So we've talked about all these situations, and that sometimes there's never a book or there's never a story that really is your situation. So how do you share really critical information with your children? So social stories were originally developed for families with children with autism and autism spectrum disorder. But in my mind, I think that they are a really valuable resource that we could all use. And it's like we often develop strategies for special populations. And then when we think about it, thinking, if we did this with all kids, wouldn't it be amazing? And so that's my idea about social stories. So basically, they were developed to support exchange of information between parents and children and professionals. And they wanted to tell a story. And it was always positive. It was, do not do this, but it was like the opposite. What do you do in this situation? So their goal of social stories was to promote positive behavior. And also to change behavior without confrontation. So let's not have a fight about this. Let's say, this is how we would do it because, and help children understand and accept these new situations. So what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to sort of flip out of these slides and go to a social story. And there are a bunch of social stories in your package. There's a social story about waiting. And these ones have been developed for children with autism, but I think every child could learn how to wait. There's a social story that we included about asking someone to play with you. So those are two that we included, and I'm just going to stop the share for 1 minute while I switch to a different screen and reshare that screen. Sorry. Okay. So this is a social story that was written about social distancing. So maybe maybe we won't have to do this anymore, but I'm sure there's been a lot of social stories written. So I'm wondering what social distancing means. I've been hearing it a lot, and it's hard for kids, like all these changes that have happened because of COVID. So social distancing means keeping extra space between myself and other people. And an important part of all of these social stories is they always have great illustrations, but you can just illustrate it yourself, or you can take pictures however you want. But it doesn't mean I can't be social and talk to my friends. And I think that's really important for kids to know, oh yeah, you have to stand apart, but you can still talk, you can still play. It's more like physical distance. I need to keep my body 6 feet away from other people's bodies, and they show the wrong way and the right way. And so it might happen at school and other places where there are a lot of people. In school, our desks need to be 6 feet apart, and our kids have gone through that, and I think transition, but we don't know where this is going. We might not be able to sit right next to our friends on the school bus. And there's a whole bunch of social stories about how to ride the school bus during COVID. But even though we won't be sitting right next to each other, our teachers will help us find ways to play and have fun anyway. So that's the positive coming back in. Even though this is happening, it's still positive. It's usually okay to be closer to my parents and family. My parents will tell me who I can be physically closer to. And that's important to have to make sure that they know who to go to ask the questions. The reason we need to have social distancing is because of a virus called coronavirus. The virus can make people sick. Social distancing can help so we won't get sick. When coronavirus is gone, we will be able to be physically closer to other people again. And so this is just an example where I wanted you to really see like a social story in action and think about it. And so, for example, if your child is like, starting a new school, if your child is afraid to take the bus to school, all of those things, you can just make a little storybook about it, make it simple, make it positive. This is your new school. This is how you're going to get to school. This is your classroom. Most schools are very positive and very accepting, and they want to help your children transition and have a happy transition. So if you're moving and your children have to move schools, you want to be able to tell them about the new school, about how to make new friends and all of those things. So sometimes these tricky subjects we like to just sweep under the rug, but I think it's to our advantage, and it's definitely to their social skill development's advantage for us to talk openly about this and say, this is how you make friends. This is what your new school looks like. If you need to write a story about it to help, even just to help you get your thoughts together in a positive way, then that's great. And there's lots of resources out there to help you with that. So, and I think the other thing that I want to say is that there's a couple other resources. There's a resource on words and topics to avoid using in school. So things that we don't talk about at school, which can be pretty important. And then there's one that talks about appropriate topics, whether you're with parents, friends, teachers, acquaintances, and we kind of covered that already. So hopefully this will help you in that somewhat difficult area of development of social skills.
Excellent.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mary Ellen. Appreciate that. So we do have a couple of questions for you. So one question that we have is, my son has ADHD and has next to no impulse control. How can he learn to filter what he says?
A tough question, right?
Always.
And I guess as a speech pathologist, what I would say the critical thing is to develop scripts. So this is what you say when, and just like, it may sound like very basic, but it is very basic. And sometimes you just have to say, this is what you say when, and you have to recognize there's not that impulse control. Sometimes a visual cue works. So if you know that the child is like reaching the limit, and if you can work with the teacher, daycare provider, whoever it is, and whatever that sign is, whether it's a hand up, stop, whether it's cut, that means stop and think, take a break, refocus. And sometimes that visual cue will help them refocus, and then they can return to, oh yeah, what was that script I thought about? Some people have even put little tags on their backpack with, what to say.
Okay. Tips on socializing after COVID.
I mean, that's really, really hard because suddenly we're changing the rules again, right? So that's where you have to like explicitly tell children, these were the rules then, these are the rules now, this is why. Some of the things still apply, like you still don't want to be like in somebody's face, but you can be a little bit closer. So you figure out what strategies that work in your family, what play dates you can encourage, and then, going to the park and being able to make friends there in the outdoors. Those are all options.
Okay. And my child constantly talks over people and interrupts. How do I get them to stop?
So I guess that's sort of like wanting to take over the world, right? So that's the whole idea of sharing. And if you don't share, what the consequences of not sharing are. So, and you, in that situation, you can also have a visual cue. Okay, stop. It's not your turn yet. I will tell you when it's your turn. And you may have to go to that basic level in order to get them to stop. And then gradually you can move into it's your turn.
Okay. And I think that's all the questions that we've got thus far. You answered everybody else's questions that we had during the presentation. So thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you for your time and your expertise on this. And if anybody has any other questions after this presentation, feel free to reach out. If we don't have the answers, we will make sure that we find the answers for you, and we will contact Mary Ellen if there is anything in particular there that she can also share her expertise in. Mary Ellen, do you have anything that you'd like to share too before we say goodbye for the evening?
No, I think if we think about COVID, like for all of us, this is a new world. So we've had to change and adopt, etc. And I think we're going to have to continue. And I think the message of this presentation is the basic importance of social skills and developing those skills has not changed because of COVID. COVID has made it more difficult, so our challenge is greater, but we have to continue to support our kids. And I think having open conversations about this is really critical. And I think in previous generations, people have not necessarily done that. So some parents today will have had that experience, others won't. So it's going to be hard to talk about, but it's important.
Perfect. Well said. Thank you very much. Thank you for joining us on this, Wednesday evening. Greatly appreciate it. And without further ado, thank you, everybody. And